Working our way through the Middle Ages. Today, we're continuing our discussion that we left off two PowerPoints ago with the political development of England and France in the Middle Ages. And we're going to continue talking about that with the Hundred Years' War that's going to last from 1337 to 1453. When we're talking about the Hundred Years' War, there's a couple things we want to keep in the back of our mind to be able to, before we get into too much of the nitty-gritty of it, to kind of understand what we're talking about when we're talking about a 100-year-long war. The concept of war itself is problematic. One, the fighting is not continuous. It's not 100 years of war from this date to this date, continual fighting. As we'll see when we work our way through the stages and phases of the war, there are long periods of truce where England and France are roughly getting along with each other, but it's not 100 straight years of fighting. If you paid any attention to the title slide at all, you'll understand the war lasted for more than 100 years. So it's not just a very quick, easy kind of math that's being done there. And the phrase itself, the Hundred Years' War, is something that won't appear until the 19th century, till the 1800s. Again, we try to make history an easier thing to understand by chunkifying it. And so historians in the 1800s looking to chunkify the medieval history of England and France took this and said, well, let's just go and use this 100 Years' War concept to describe this time period from 500 years previously. No one's waking up in the 100 Years' War. Another great stretching and saying another great day to be alive in the 100 Years' War. This is a historian's term invented to describe the period. The Hundred Years' War is something that we've already talked about a little bit in depth here, and it is a outgrowth of a feudal problem. The war is an outcome of problems that existed for over 200 years following the Norman conquest of England in 1066. And the basic fundamental feudal question is the English kings are both equal to French kings, because kings are equal to kings. However, because the English kings also own land in France, Gascony, and Aquitaine, that in essence they've received as fiefdoms from the King of France. They are also vassals to the King of France and owe him the kind of feudal obligations because of that. So, is the King of France, the fundamental question, a equal king, or is the King of France, with his land holdings in France, a vassal to the French king? And that's kind of the fundamental problem that is really at issue here. And we'll see how some other things work their way throughout the course of this conflict. So, like we just said, we're talking about the problems of chunkifying history. We're going to go and try to chunkify this 100-year-long war. And we can break it up into four main phases, and that's how we're going to kind of give a cursory, kind of very fast, quick description of the Hundred Years' War. First phase lasts from about 1337 to 1360, and the war kind of begins when the English King Edward III claims the French throne after the end of the Capetian dynasty. So again, we've got the issues of what we talked about before as kind of the underlying issues, but remember, we're also throwing in family relationships as well as kings are trying to solidify their political standings in Europe by marrying off their sons and daughters to each other. And so through this kind of very convoluted family tree, the French king has died. There is no more heirs. The Capetian dynasty is done. And so Edward III, through his claims as a duke here and landholders there, as well as through family claims, says that he is the now new king of France, as well as being the king of England. The people in France disagree, and that leads to a war. Obviously, if you're the king of England, you're in England. If you want to become the king of France, you got to go to France. So that's what they do. England is going to land on the continent of Europe, try to, from their land holdings in France and through those things, it's going to rely a lot on hit and run attacks through this first phase of the war. And importantly, they're going to win the famous battles of Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356. And these are two major battles that are very conclusive and major victories for England. What we see at Poitiers is the capture of the King of France. And so, if you have the King of France captured, and again, the supposed King of France, if from the Edward III's point of view, this is very much going to give you a bargaining chip to be able to negotiate from. So, the first phase is going to end with the Treaty of Brittany in 1360, as the people of France, the French government, is trying to get the King of France out from being held uh, under capture. England is going to get most of what it wants. We can talk about the end of each phase. We can make it similar to, say, quarters in a football game or a basketball game. After the end of the first quarter, England is unequivocally in the lead. They have signed a treaty that gets most of what they want. They've increased their land holdings. They've got a ton of money from the King of France to be able to ransom himself out of there, a literal king's ransom, and be able to set that King of France up still as the King of France. Edward III still has claims on it, but is willing to back them off because of all the things that he does. England gets what it wants, which is going to make the people of France upset. Remember, hopefully you're paying attention to the dates. This is, again, the dates are important to know in like a grand sense. You can always just Google these dates, but we should know the kind of the timeline of events here, what's going on. The Black Death is also ravaging this part of France as well. So the peasant revolts in 1358, the Chambfry, are not only an outgrowth of the economic and social problems of the Black Death that's left in its wake, but as well as all the issues that are going on here with the first phase of the Hundred Years' War. Just kind of, again, we can go through, if you're a military historian, you can go through all these different things. You got kind of the king going in different places. We get the great character of the Black Prince, who's got a black suit of armor, he's going on and doing stuff from there. But again, Edward III has said, I am the rightful king of England and France. You can see here in this portrait, he's got the three lions of England and the fleur-de-lis of France. So you can kind of see that on his outfit, trying to go and show that he is the rightful heir to the throne of France to be able to rule both kingdoms jointly. The Battle of Crecy is a major English victory. They find themselves camped and entrenched on top of a hill facing east. The French army, combined with the Bohemians, that's modern day Czech Republic, are at the bottom of the hill, and they've decided that they are going to advance up the hill into the teeth of a entrenched English army with archers shooting at them the entire way. The French decide to attack at dawn, so that's why we said this is important. This is facing east. So as they are attacking, what's rising up from behind the English are the sun. So it doesn't go real well, not very well planned out by the French. John of Bohemia is famously also known as Blind John of Bohemia. He was blind and has been blind for a decade, and the chronicles of the time period say that when he heard how the battle was going, he had his handlers tie their horses to his horse, and he went into battle for the French, and all their bodies were tied or found with their horses still tied together when the battle was over. So that is the genius of the French at the Battle of Crecy here. And so that's what they're going and doing, kind of fighting their way up the hill in this painting into the teeth of the English archers and foot soldiers at the top. The Battle of Poitiers is important for two reasons. One, the King of France has been captured. He's held hostage by the English. And importantly, most of the French nobility dies at this battle, which kind of, again, uproots a lot of the kind of land claimants in France. So this is a major victory for England at the Battle of Poitiers. So what we see here after the first phase of the Hundred Years' War, England, which has controlled land here in the south of France, has begun to advance from Aquitaine into other areas here. And again, they've gained a couple little bit more land in the north as well. Quarter number two, the second phase of the war lasts from 1360 to 1396. France is responding to the English expansion. They're going to rely on raiding the English coast. So they attack from the northern France across the English Channel and hit and run raids along the coastline, as well as, if we again go backwards and pull up our map, working southwestward into Aquitaine, kicking the English out over there. A series of French victories follows the reoccupying of Aquitaine, and so the second phase very much ends with a truce in 1396, with the French winning the second phase of the war. So England has won the first phase, France has responded and won the second phase. As you probably can imagine, we haven't got through 100 years yet. A lot of important questions are still unresolved. The biggest being, who is the true rightful king of France? Is because the English kings still believe that, again, going back to Edward III, they also should be the rulers of France. So, second phase, French victory. Core number three. Third phase lasts from 1415 to 1429. The big key new character that enters in the Hundred Years' War is the young king Henry V. And he very much says, I should be the rightful king of England, as well as the rightful king of France. And so he goes, invades into the north of France to work his way towards Paris. Importantly, different from what Edward III did, where Edward III, who thought he was the king of France, is just trying to destroy the French army. Henry V is coming with the understanding that he is going to occupy this land. So he's not just going to take this land over, he's going to rule it, that he's taking over in the north of France as he's working his way towards Paris and the throne of the Kingdom of France. This phase is going to culminate in 1415 when England wins the famous Battle of Agincourt. Uh, Henry V is going to be a big deal in terms of English history. He's very successful, and so he is going to be immortalized in the Shakespeare play Henry V, one of my famous ones. And the Agincourt, the night before the battle, the English have been been trying to maneuver themselves. The French king and the French army are popping themselves, preventing them from getting into Paris. The English aren't feeling well. It's October. It's been raining. So they're not doing well. So the morning of the battle, Henry V famously gives a rousing speech to kind of get his troops all fired up. Shakespeare immortalized it very famously with "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he never so vile that this day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhood's chief falls. Any speak that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day." St. Crispin's Day is the day of the battle that they have there. So that's the Battle of Agincourt. And multiple movies have put that on there, including the King with my buddy Timothy Chalamet as Henry V, where I think he kills Robert Pattinson, that's on Netflix. That's a pretty recent one. Christian Bale's in a movie where Kenneth Branagh plays Henry V. That's from 1989. Laurence Olivier famously does one in the 40s. Henry V wins that battle, kills the Prince of France. King of France has got to go make deal. Third phase ends with the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. And what we see here in those 5 years, Henry V and the Princess of France, the King of France's daughter Catherine, have made a lot of Google eyes at each other, and they've wooed each other pretty well, and they've gotten married. So the third phase ends. The French king remains alive. However, he is an older person. So the Treaty of Troyes sets it up that the French king continues to be the king of France, and then when he dies, because his son died at Agincourt, Henry VI of England, who is the offspring of Henry V and Princess Catherine, who's now Henry V's wife, who was the King of France's daughter, will become the King of England of both countries. And so England has very clearly won the third phase. France, not happy about this. They don't want this to happen. They don't want to be ruled by London. They don't want to be ruled by Henry VI. So in 1431, when the treaty kicks into action, the King of France dies, and now Henry VI is crowned the King of France. He is rejected by the French, meaning the English have to go back to France to reclaim what they rightfully feel is their throne. In the third phase, the famous thing that happens is the Battle of Agincourt. The English very smartly kind of get themselves set up with forest is the wrong word, a tree line to the left of them, tree line to the right of them, and they put their archers up front of the battle as well as in the woods. This has been a field that has been wet, has been rainy. That's important so that when the French army the French army is over here, sorry. When the French army goes and attacks, they have to advance towards the English army across a couple hundred yards of open field, which the English archers are using to shoot at. But remember, the field is wet and muddy, and these guys are in 200, 300, 100 sounds suits of armor. So the French first wave begins to get stuck in the mud. As they begin to try to get them unstuck as they're being shot, they try to turn around. When the second wave comes in, it becomes a giant mess, and the lightly armored English archers and foot soldiers are able to get in there and start killing, as a lot of these guys become literally stuck in the mud, which leads to the French army's doom at Agincourt. That's King Henry V, right, going and killing people on the battlefield. They're doing that, and again, this is pretty famously immortalized in the Shakespeare play. This is a big deal in terms of English history. So, as we get to the end of the third phase with the Treaty of Troyes, what we see here is the Red of England is now taking over most of the north of France. They still have the lands down here they've regained lands down here in Aquitaine. The King of France has been really kind of pushed out towards central and southern France, as well as having other people aligned with the King of England against the French king. So things aren't looking real well for France. So they're looking for anyone, to come and help them out in the fourth and final phase of the war, with England very much in charge and things not looking well. So the fourth phase is going to last from 1429 to 1453, and as we said, the French is looking to someone to come help them and deliver a miracle to get them out of this situation. And in 1429, they turn to a 13-year-old girl in Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc receives a message from God that she's going to lead the French to victory. She then goes and finds the king of the Dauphin of France. He says, "Yeah, good, go ahead. Nobody else is doing anything." She goes and helps rescue the city of Orleans, then wins an important battle at Reims, and the French army begins to get some momentum, get some confidence, and begin to become more resurgent. As Joan continues to do this, some people aren't exactly happy with this teenage girl being in charge of the French army. She gets herself captured on the battlefield and then is ransomed back to England, where she is put on trial. She's put on trial. She says, "Why are you doing this for France?" And Joan of Arc responds with, "Because God told me to." The English respond, "How could God tell you to fight for France when God obviously wants England to win?" Therefore, Joan of Arc is a witch, and she is burned at the stake for witchcraft. Joan of Arc is eventually going to become Saint Joan of Arc, but she's going to have to wait a while for that to happen, which is not going to happen until the 1990s. The fourth phase is with, again, Joan of Arc is going to get the French army rocking and rolling, and the war effectively is going to be over by 1453. The victories in the fourth phase by the French army is going to effectively kick most of England out of France. All of the French possessions in France, other than the port city of Calais, which is going to remain in English hands for another couple hundred years. And again, England is going to be very hard pressed to prove that they own land in France if they don't have anybody to own it. Right? Possession famously is 9/10 of the law. They just don't have that. So the 100 Years' War, hopefully you're picking this up, is won by France. And so that is going to put an end to this feudal issue of who is the rulers of France. It is the kings of France. English kings have lost any sort of claim on the throne. So Joan of Arc here being visited by the angels as a vision of God to go and lead the French armies into victory, takes up arms, again wins the important battle at Orleans, wins the battle at Reims, and then goes famously keeps marching the French to victory. She's captured by the English, put on trial, found to be a witch, burned at the stake in England for her crimes, mostly against England. To finish up, what are the effects of the war? What does the war leave in its wake? A couple different things here and a couple different wide-ranging effects that we see from the Hundred Years' War. Number one, the war made direct national taxation a common event. Wars cost money. 100 years long worth of wars costs a lot of money. So where have kings, again, since time immemorial, have asked people to pay taxes, You really don't need taxes unless you need to pay for stuff. Well, what happens when you need to continue to feed your army, pay your army, transport your army? That all requires money, and the kings have to keep going back to people every year after year, which allows them to get people in this habit of paying their taxes and get into the habit of doing so. So when there's no longer wars or when there's periods of truce, they keep paying taxes, which allows for these kingdoms, particularly of England and France, to keep raising the amount of money available to the king to do other stuff, sometimes for the people, sometimes just for the kings of those countries. And again, we get into the idea of what's the most two inevitable things that can happen in everybody's life. You're all going to die, and we're all going to pay taxes. And that, again, starts to deal with what we see here out of the Hundred Years' War, particularly being taxed by national governments. Number two, they're making all this money. The kings begin to use these greater financial resources to pay for larger armies of, and this is the key word, foot soldiers. Foot soldiers are paid for by the king. Therefore, their loyalty goes to the king. We're moving away from the feudal arrangement of granting fiefs to knights to fight for you in that feudal obligations. And so what we are seeing is these foot soldiers are becoming professional standing armies that are responsible just to the king, and we have less and less of these knights who are maybe out for their own political or economic gain on the battlefield. In the year 1450, France creates a permanent standing army, and this is the first professional standing army in Western Europe in 1,000 years since the fall of the Roman Empire in the 4th century AD. We also see changes in military technology take place over the course of this war. The big one is the ability of the longbow, the English longbow, to shine on the battlefield. The longbow is nice from a military perspective in that it combines the power of a crossbow with the speed of a short bow. Um, the longbow has what we want called punching power, and a crossbow has punching power because you want to be able to shoot through these plate armor of these knights that are doing that. Now, a crossbow can do that, but a crossbow, to get all of that power, has to either crank the drawstring all the way back. Mechanical means some of these crossbows, a man has to lie on his back and use his feet to be able to push the bow in one direction as he's pulling on the string the other to lock that in. That gives you a powerful arrow and a speed being released from that, but that takes a long time. The short bow, you're able to kind of, as fast as you can pull it out of the quiver and knock the arrow on your bow, you can fire it. But those short bows, because they're shorter, lack that punching power. There's stories in the earlier Middle Ages where knights are leaving the battlefield almost riddled with arrows stuck in their armor, looking like porcupines, but the knight himself is fine because, again, that short bow does not have that punching power to get to the gooey innards inside those suits of armor. The longbow combines both that. From about 300 to 500 yards, these are lethal against a suit of armor and are lethal very much, probably a little bit farther away against unarmored people. And so a relatively cheap English archer is worth his weight in gold, if not more, because he can take out knights from other armies before those knights are even able to engage others. And we see this most dramatically at Crécy and at Agincourt, the power of what the longbow is. It's long because it's sometimes 5 feet, 6 feet in length. And again, the physics of it, that gives it more spring as you're pulling the wood of the yew tree back to provide this power. The English kings very quickly realized the benefits of having this on the battlefield. It became illegal in England for a long stretch of time to participate in any sports outside of archery, so that everybody was constantly working on their archery skills. So if the king needed an army, he very quickly had a well-trained and disciplined army right away to go. This requires a tremendous amount of pull strength to that. If anybody does like compound bows, we had a archer who was working his way through Joliet Catholic towards the national archery team. How good every archery is. The pull draws on that are with kind of the compound bows, maybe it's 50, 60 pounds to be able to pull that back. The drawstrings on this, it's like crazy. It's like 100, 125 pounds. So think about it's like a row that you're doing if you're in the weight room. It's 125 pounds to pull that back every time. And think about if you do that fast. how much strength and discipline it's going to require to hold that on the battlefield. Because this lasts for so long, other new technology are introduced as well. Gunpowder makes its entrance onto the European battlefield in the Hundred Years' War through the use of cannons. It's not going to be truly a game changer or that effective early on here, but the potential is very quickly seen, and we see both the increasing in firepower as well as the shrinking it to be able to provide rifles, muskets, and pistols for eventual soldiers. Another effect is the feeling of nationalism's increase. People are fighting for the King of France to keep the King of France on the throne. They're fighting for the King of England. So people slowly start to stop thinking so much in local terms, but in national terms, and identify as English, identifying as French. And finally, through their defeat, England's going to suffer a series of internal problems. This has wrecked their economy. It's caused social issues. And so what's going to end up coming out of this is the famous War of the Roses is going to be fought over control of the throne, which is going to be kind of an offshoot of what's happened through the Hundred Years' War. This is where you have the House of Tudor with the Red Rose of England fighting against the House of Lancaster with the White Rose, and those are roses on their coat of arms. And the House of Tudor is going to win, which is why you have red roses on the coat of arms for the King of England to this day. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, the War of the Roses is the loose, minus a lot of the magic and dragons, the loose kind of spine that forms the story for the Game of Thrones series of books and TV shows. So that's the English longbow. Hard to be able to tell. And again, the picture we're going to show you in a second is even that. But that's about the size of a man in length. We'll get the laser pointer out. So for this distance to here, it's been pulled back a little bit, is about 5-6 feet in length, thus giving it the name the longbow. And again, it's the physics equation of by pulling that drawstring back, the spring, the potential energy is being put in, is being held in the spring of the wooden shaft of the bow here. And then when you release it, all that energy is put into this arrow, which can be almost 3 feet in length, which again provides that punching power that you need to hit a suit of armor. So this is the longbow in action. Again, that doesn't really do it a whole lot of justice, but you can kind of see this is one made in the same style as what we would have saw in the Hundred Years' War. And then again, just to finish up real fast, this is 4 phases of the war. We see in phase 1, England is kind of expanded. Phase 2, they've expanded even further. That's the Battle of Poitiers. Phase 3, the unequivocal leaders in controlling of France, and then France pushes all of England out except for the city of Calais in the north, in which England is going to hold for a while. So that's going to end the 100 Years' War for us. We've got to do one more lecture on the Middle Ages to end our unit. We're going to talk a little bit about church reformers next, as well as the growth of towns, which again is another effect that we saw not only from the Black Death, but through the 100 Years' War here.